The theater after hours breathes differently than it does under the hot glare of stage lights and the eager murmur of a waiting audience. Tonight, like so many nights before, I sit alone in the third row center, surrounded by the familiar scent of dust and old velvet, the faint mustiness of worn seat fabric that has absorbed decades of dreams and disappointments. The work light casts its harsh circle on the empty stage, illuminating nothing but bare boards and the ghost marks where sets once stood. This is when the theater tells its truest stories, in the silence between performances, when only the radiator's gentle tick marks time and the distant hum of streetlights filters through the lobby windows. If you've ever wondered how legends are truly born, stay with me through this memory, because what I'm about to share changed everything I thought I knew about greatness. I've been coming to this theater for over 40 years, first as a young actor hungry for any role, any line, any chance to prove myself worthy of the craft that had captured my soul. Those early years blur together now in my memory like watercolors in rain, but certain moments remain crystalline, preserved not because they were grand or celebrated, but because they taught me what it really means to build something lasting in a world obsessed with immediate gratification and overnight success. Morgan was there in those invisible years, though few people remember that now. When they see him on screen today, commanding every scene with that voice that seems to carry the weight of mountains and the wisdom of ages, they imagine he emerged fully formed, a natural force who simply stepped into greatness. But I remember the young man who showed up night after night to empty rehearsal rooms, who treated a single line in a forgettable play with the same reverence that others reserved for Shakespeare's greatest soliloquies. I remember the coffee-stained scripts, the worn-down heels of his only good shoes, the quiet intensity with which he approached every moment, every gesture, every breath on stage. We were part of what you might charitably call the theater's forgotten regiment, a collection of actors who measured success not in reviews or applause, but in the gradual accumulation of craft, the slow building of skills that we hoped might someday matter to someone beyond ourselves. There was Margaret, who could make you cry with a single glance, but couldn't land a leading role to save her life. There was James, whose Hamlet was breathtaking in rehearsal, but who froze every time a director worth knowing watched him perform. There was Sarah, who understood character work better than anyone I've ever met, but who looked nothing like what casting directors expected a leading lady to be. And there was Morgan, who even then possessed something indefinable, a quality that made you lean forward in your seat, not because he was loud or flashy, but because he seemed to carry gravity itself in his presence. Our theater had a tradition that most people never knew about. After the official rehearsals ended and the directors went home to their comfortable apartments and their assumption that the real work was done, we would gather in the dimly lit space and continue working. Not because we were perfectionists, though we were, and not because we were afraid of failure, though we were that too. We stayed because we understood something that the industry around us seemed to have forgotten, that great acting is built in the repetition, in the thousand tiny adjustments that happen when no one is watching, in the willingness to explore a single moment from every possible angle until you find the truth hidden beneath the surface. Morgan treated these after-hour sessions with the kind of reverence that others reserved for opening nights. He would arrive carrying his battered script folder, the one with the coffee ring stains and the corners worn soft from handling, and he would settle into the work with a focus that was almost monastic in its intensity. While the rest of us chatted about our day jobs and our weekend plans and our latest audition disasters, Morgan would be quietly studying his pages, not just memorizing the words, but excavating the meaning beneath them, finding the emotional archaeology that would transform ink on paper into lived human experience. I remember one particular evening in late autumn, when the radiator had given up its fight against the encroaching cold, and we could see our breath in small puffs as we worked. The play was something forgettable, a contemporary piece about urban isolation that would close after 2 weeks and disappear from theater history, without leaving so much as a footnote. Morgan had been cast in a small supporting role, maybe 8 or 10 lines total, the kind of part that most actors would approach as a stepping stone or a placeholder, something to get through on the way to more substantial work. But Morgan didn't see it that way. As we ran through scenes that night, I watched him work with those few lines the way a jeweler works with precious stones, turning them over in his mind, examining them from every angle, testing their weight and their resonance, until he found exactly the right way for them to land in the theater's acoustic space. One line in particular seemed to fascinate him. It was nothing special on the page, just a simple observation about loneliness that the playwright had written as exposition. But in Morgan's hands, that line began to accumulate layers of meaning, becoming not just a statement of fact, but a window into an entire philosophy of solitude and connection. What I witnessed that night, and in dozens of nights like it, was the slow transformation of craft into art. Morgan understood something that took the rest of us years to learn, that the actor's job is not to push emotion onto an audience, but to create space for emotion to exist, to build a vessel strong enough and clear enough that feeling can flow through it without being distorted or diminished. He worked with the patience of someone building a cathedral, laying each stone with careful attention to how it would support the stones that would come after. His approach to that single line was like watching a masterclass in the architecture of performance. He would speak the words, then pause, considering not just what they meant, but how they felt in his mouth, how they resonated in his chest, how they connected to the character's inner life and the larger themes of the play. He would try the line with different emphases, different rhythms, different degrees of intensity, but never in a way that felt forced or artificial. Each variation was a genuine exploration, a sincere attempt to find the most truthful way for those particular words to exist in that particular moment. The rest of us would watch these explorations with a mixture of admiration and bewilderment. We were accustomed to actors who approached their craft like athletes, all energy and effort and visible strain. But Morgan worked more like a scientist or a philosopher, testing hypotheses with careful precision, building understanding through systematic investigation. There was something almost meditative about his process, a quality of deep listening that made you want to quiet your own mind and pay attention to subtleties you might otherwise miss. Margaret once asked him about his method, curious about the thinking behind all those careful variations. Morgan's answer has stayed with me through all these years, perhaps because it captured something essential about the difference between performing and acting, between showing off and serving the story. He said that every word spoken on stage was like a stone dropped into still water, creating ripples that would affect everything that came after. The actor's job, he believed, was to understand the weight of the stone, the depth of the water, and the nature of the ripples, so that each word could find its perfect trajectory and land with exactly the right force. As the weeks passed and our little after-hours company continued to gather in that cold theater, I began to notice something remarkable about Morgan's development as an actor. While the rest of us struggled with the usual problems that plague young performers, the tendency to push too hard, to indicate rather than simply be, to fill every moment with busy action rather than allow silence to do its work, Morgan seemed to be moving in the opposite direction. He was learning to do less, not more. He was discovering the power of stillness, the eloquence of restraint, the way that presence itself could be a form of action. This was not the kind of lesson that could be taught in a classroom or workshop. It was something that could only be learned through repetition, through the slow accumulation of experience, through hundreds of hours spent in exploration and discovery. Night after night, Morgan would work with his handful of lines, and night after night, those lines would become more precise, more truthful, more connected to something essential and human. The transformation was so gradual that you couldn't see it happening in real time, like watching a tree grow or a season change. But when you stepped back and compared where he had been to where he was, the progress was undeniable. What struck me most about Morgan's approach was his willingness to embrace uncertainty, to sit with questions rather than rushing toward answers. Many actors, especially young ones, feel compelled to make strong choices immediately, to commit to an interpretation and stick with it, regardless of what the work itself might be trying to tell them. But Morgan seemed comfortable with ambiguity, willing to let a character's truth emerge slowly through the process of exploration rather than imposing his own ideas from the outside. This patience extended beyond his individual performance to his understanding of the collaborative nature of theater. He listened to other actors with the same attention he brought to his own lines, understanding that every moment on stage was part of a larger conversation, that his character's truth could only be fully realized in relationship to the other characters and their truths. During our late-night sessions, he would often pause in the middle of working on his own lines to offer observations about someone else's moment, always in a spirit of genuine curiosity rather than criticism. There was one evening that stands out in my memory with particular clarity, perhaps because it was the night I fully understood what Morgan was building in those quiet hours of repetition and exploration. We had been working on a scene between his character and Margaret's, a brief exchange about disappointment and hope that served mainly as a bridge between two more important scenes. On the page, it was functional dialogue, workmanlike writing, that moved the plot forward without attempting anything particularly ambitious. But as I watched Morgan and Margaret work through the scene that night, something magical began to happen. The functional dialogue started to accumulate emotional weight. The simple exchange began to resonate with larger themes about human connection and the courage required to remain vulnerable in a world that often punishes vulnerability. It wasn't that they were adding anything that wasn't there in the text, but rather that they were finding everything that was there, excavating layers of meaning that the playwright might not even have been conscious of including. Morgan's contribution to this transformation was his absolute commitment to the reality of the moment. He never seemed to be acting in the sense of pretending or performing. Instead, he appeared to be simply existing as his character, responding truthfully to the circumstances of the scene, allowing his character's thoughts and feelings to arise naturally from the situation rather than imposing them from the outside. The effect was mesmerizing. Even in that cold, empty theater, with nothing but a bare stage and a work light, he created a sense of complete reality that made you forget you were watching a performance. The line that had fascinated him for weeks finally found its perfect expression that night. It was a simple observation about the way loneliness could become familiar, comfortable even, until the prospect of connection seemed more frightening than the certainty of solitude. In Morgan's hands, the line became a small masterpiece of emotional complexity, carrying within it not just the character's immediate state of mind, but his entire history of disappointment and hope, his fear of vulnerability, and his deep human need for understanding. When he spoke those words that night, the entire theater seemed to shift around them. Margaret's response, which she had been struggling with for weeks, suddenly clicked into place with perfect naturalness. The scene, which had been merely functional, became a moment of genuine human truth. And all of this happened not through any grand gesture or theatrical fireworks, but through Morgan's absolute commitment to the simple reality of one person speaking honestly to another. As I sit here now in this familiar theater, decades removed from those nights of exploration and discovery, I find myself thinking about the nature of legacy and the way true greatness is built. The world knows Morgan Freeman as a voice of authority and wisdom, a presence that can command attention and respect simply by existing. But they don't know about the foundation that supports that presence, the countless hours of work that happened in empty rooms with no audience except a handful of fellow seekers who understood the value of craft for its own sake. Those of us who were there during the invisible years understand something that the rest of the world can only guess at, that the power Morgan carries on screen today was forged in those quiet moments of exploration, in the patient work of discovering how to be truthful in imaginary circumstances, in the willingness to treat even the smallest role with the same respect and attention that others reserved for star turns. The voice that now narrates documentaries and commands movie screens was trained in late-night sessions, where the only audience was the empty seats and the only critic was the work itself. I think about the young actors I encounter now, so eager for immediate recognition, so hungry for the external validation that they imagine will transform them into the artists they dream of becoming. They want to skip the invisible years, to bypass the slow accumulation of craft in favor of quick success and public acclaim. But they don't understand what those of us who lived through those quiet years learned, that the work itself is the reward, that the slow building of skill and understanding is not a means to any end but an end in itself. Morgan understood this instinctively, even as a young man. He approached each small role, each single line, each moment of exploration as if it contained the secret to everything he hoped to become. He never seemed to be waiting for permission to take his work seriously. He never seemed to be holding back his full commitment until he was given a role that felt worthy of it. He brought everything he had to everything he did, understanding that greatness is not something that happens to you, but something you build, one careful choice at a time, one truthful moment after another. The theater is different now than it was in those days. The building has been renovated, the seats reupholstered, the lighting system modernized. The coffee stains and worn patches that once marked our presence have been cleaned away or covered over. But late at night, when the official business of the theater has ended and the audience has gone home, the space still holds the memory of all those hours of work, all those moments of discovery, all those quiet victories that no one witnessed except the handful of us who understood their value. I can still hear the sound of pages turning as we worked through our scripts, the soft footsteps of actors moving around the stage, the gentle hum of the radiator that struggled to keep us warm through those long winter rehearsals. I can still feel the particular quality of attention that filled the space during our explorations, the sense that we were engaged in something important, even if the world outside might not recognize its importance. Morgan's voice was already distinctive even then, though it hadn't yet acquired the weight and resonance that would make it one of the most recognizable sounds in American culture. But you could hear the potential in it, the depth and warmth that would eventually make audiences around the world lean forward in their seats when he spoke. More importantly, you could hear the intelligence behind it, the careful thought that went into every choice, the respect for language and meaning that would eventually make his performances feel less like acting than like truth-telling. There were nights when we would work until the early morning hours, so absorbed in the process of discovery that we would lose track of time entirely. The street outside would grow quiet as the bars closed and the late commuters made their way home, but inside our little sanctuary of exploration, time seemed suspended. We were engaged in the ancient work of transformation, the mysterious process by which human beings learn to step outside themselves and become other people, to speak other people's words with such conviction that they become their own. What I realize now, looking back across the years, is that Morgan was already teaching in those days, though none of us recognized it at the time. His approach to the work, his patience with the process, his willingness to explore every possibility, before settling on a choice, served as a kind of masterclass for the rest of us. We learned by watching him work, by seeing how he approached each moment with fresh eyes and an open heart, by witnessing his absolute commitment to truth over effect. He never lectured or offered advice unless asked. His teaching was more subtle than that, embedded in the example he set simply by doing the work with complete integrity. When the rest of us would rush toward easy choices or settle for approximations of truth, Morgan would continue digging, continue exploring, continue searching for the precise emotional reality that the moment required. His persistence was inspiring and humbling in equal measure. The lesson he taught without meaning to, the lesson that has stayed with me through all the years since, is that great acting is not about talent alone, though talent certainly matters. It's about the willingness to engage with the work on its own terms, to serve the story rather than using it to serve yourself, to find truth in imaginary circumstances, and then trust that truth to be enough. It's about understanding that the audience's experience is more important than your own, that the character's truth is more important than your comfort, that the work itself is more important than any external recognition it might bring. As I prepared to leave this theater for the night, as I have done thousands of times before, I take one last look around at the empty seats that witnessed those crucial years of development and discovery. They held us through our failures and our breakthroughs, our moments of doubt and our flashes of clarity. They were the only audience that mattered during those invisible years when we were learning what it meant to be actors worthy of the name. The work light still casts its harsh circle on the empty stage, and for a moment I can almost see Morgan, as he was then, young and hungry, and absolutely committed to the craft that would eventually carry him to heights none of us could have imagined. I can almost hear his voice working through that single line, testing its weight and meaning, finding the precise way for it to land in this acoustic space. I can almost feel the quality of attention that filled the room when he worked, the sense that something important was happening, even if no one outside these walls would ever know about it. This is how legends are actually built, not in the blaze of spotlights and the thunder of applause, but in the quiet accumulation of craft, in the patient exploration of truth, in the willingness to take every moment seriously regardless of how small it might seem. Morgan Freeman's greatness was not discovered. It was constructed, one careful choice at a time, one truthful moment after another, in empty rooms where the only witness was the work itself. I turn off the work light and gather my things, preparing to lock the theater and walk out into the night. Behind me, the seats remain empty, but they are not vacant. They hold the memory of every hour we spent in exploration, every moment of discovery, every small victory that brought us closer to understanding what it means to transform written words into lived human experience. They hold the secret that the world outside does not know, that the greatest performances begin not with inspiration, but with perspiration, not with applause, but with attention, not with recognition, but with the simple willingness to show up and do the work, night after night after night. The legacy grows in the silence between performances, in the space between words, in the patient accumulation of moments that no one sees, but everyone eventually feels. This is the true story of how greatness is built, one line at a time, one night at a time, in empty rooms where the only audience that matters is the work itself, waiting patiently to be served with the respect and attention it deserves.